Morning, Keith.
Hey, morning, Chris. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Doing good.
Morning, Keith. You hear me all right?
Hey, Josh. Yeah, I hear you just fine. Thanks.
Great, thanks.
Morning, Keith.
Hey, Tom. How are you doing?
Good.
Good. Madam Vice Chairwoman, looks like we're recording, so you can go ahead and start the meeting whenever you're ready.
Okay. Good morning. Welcome to this virtual MetroPlan Orlando TAC meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order. My name is Lee Pullum, and I'm the TAC Vice Chairperson. I'll be chairing the meeting today since our chairman is a little under the weather. We also have a team working to ensure this meeting runs smoothly. Today's meeting was advertised on MetroPlan Orlando's website and social media, as well as through targeted emails. Florida's Sunshine Law typically requires a quorum to be physically present in a room for a government meeting. However, Governor DeSantis suspended this requirement in an executive order, allowing government boards to conduct business using virtual meetings. This order has been extended through the end of October. We'll keep microphones muted unless you've been recognized to speak, and we'll use the raise hands feature to participate in the discussion. There are 2 public comment points in the meeting. Members of the public who want to speak will use the raise hands feature found on the participants tab. If attending by phone, you can hit *9 to raise your hand and request to be recognized. When you're called, your microphone will be temporarily unmuted by staff and will ask you to state your name and contact information for the record. We also accepted comments by email and phone message before the meeting. The guidelines for public comment are posted at metroplanorlando.org/virtual meetings. We want this and all future online meetings to be accessible to all. Participants may join by computer, tablet, or phone. If you need accommodations to participate in the future, please contact MetroPlan Orlando. At this time, I'd like to recognize Keith Caskey as the MetroPlan Orlando staff for the agenda review.
Okay, well, good morning, committee members and all those attending online. Thank you again for working with us as we conduct these virtual meetings. And again, we appreciate your patience and understanding. As approved by our board at their September meeting, the next TAC meeting will be on December 4th and will be held as a virtual workshop during which action items will be reviewed and discussed, but no formal action will be taken so that a quorum will not be required. Any committee report will be presented to the MetroPlan Orlando board, and items approved by the board may be ratified at a future in-person TAC meeting. and this format is subject to change if the governor's executive order is extended. So we'll be in touch with you all well before our next TAC meeting to let you know if there are any changes to this. Again, thank you for your flexibility during this time. As the chairwoman mentioned, we'll be using the raise hands feature to recognize committee members during the meeting and to call on members of the public during the comment time. So if you've joined us on the phone only without the video screen, please use *6 to mute and unmute your line, and please use *9 to raise your virtual hand so the meeting host can see that you wish to be recognized. You'll see that there's a chat feature on your toolbar. This communicates with all panelists in this meeting, which includes committee members, staff, and presenters. Please only use this if you are having technical issues or need assistance. A full record of the chat comments will be included with the public record of the meeting. Madam Chairwoman, that completes my announcements this morning, and there are no changes to the agenda. So now we'd like to take attendance, and I'll ask Ms. Lisa Smith to call the roll so we can confirm a quorum for the meeting.
Good morning, committee TAC members. If you could go ahead and unmute yourself now, roll call, and you can go on mute again once your name has been called. Please make sure that your video is on so that we can confirm that it's you. You'll find the mute and unmute buttons on the bottom left side of your toolbar. And when your name is called, if you could say here or present. Brett Blackadar,
Present.
Kelly Brock,
Here.
Scott Brown, Christopher Kearns,
Here.
Michael Cash,
Here.
Gus Castro,
Here.
Crystal Clem,
Present.
Ashley Cornelison,
Here.
Joshua DeVries,
Present.
Hazem El Hassar,
Present.
Commissioner Ed Gold, Will Hawthorne,
Here.
Pamela Richmond,
Present.
Conroy Jacobs,
Here.
John Dredge,
Present.
Steve Krug,
Present.
Fred Milch,
Present.
Mary Moskowitz.
This is Jeff Hopper substituting for Mary.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Nabil Muhaisen,
Present.
Renzo Nastasi, Tamika Monterville,
Here.
Tawny Allure,
Present.
Tom Radzai,
Present.
Lee Pulliam,
Here.
Rachel Giranella,
Present.
Sean Germolis,
Present.
Ian Siconia,
Here.
Chad Smith. Okay, I got you. Ian.
Sorry, here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Chad Smith.
here.
Okay, thank
Here.
you. Matt Sudemeyer.
Regina Ramos, filling in for Matt Sudmeyer.
Okay, thank you. Alyssa Edie,
Present.
Sarah Walter,
Present.
Bill Wharton.
Here.
Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. We will now hear public comments on today's action items. Do we have people who want to speak to any action items? If so, please use the raise hands function found on the bottom of your screen or by pressing *9 on your phone keypad. When we call your name, the host will unmute your microphone. You will see a button pop up that says the host wants you to unmute. Accept that prompt to activate your microphone. We ask that you provide your name and address for the record. Please hold your comments to 2 minutes or less. Are there any comments at this time?
Madam Chairman, I don't see any comments at this time.
Okay, are there any written comments that were submitted before the meeting?
No, there were not.
Okay. We have a total of 3 presentations listed on today's agenda. Please use the raise hands function to be recognized if you want to ask a question. You may raise your hand during the presentation to indicate you want to ask a question, but we will hold all questions until the presentation ends. If you're having audio issues, you can type your questions into the chat box and a moderator will relay your question. We have a 3-part update today on the 2045 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. Ms. Cynthia Lambert of the MetroPlan Orlando staff will lead off with a status report on public participation.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chairman. It's good to see everybody today. I see a few new names in our participant list. So for those of you whom I have not had the chance to meet personally, hello, my name is Cynthia Lambert. I'm the Public Information Manager at MetroPlan Orlando. And when I talked to you at your last meeting, I presented a lot of detail on what we had been hearing from the public from our surveys. And so today is really my wrap-up presentation. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how the public's voice has shaped the 2045 plan. And we're also going to talk about how where we are in the public comment process for the plan. So we'll take just a couple seconds to set up our screen share here. And while we're getting that set up, so if y'all will remember, we started our public participation on the 2045 plan about a year ago in November of 2019. So you can move forward one slide, please. And so it's been quite a wild ride with trying to do public participation during a pandemic, as we talked about last month. So now we're really close to the end here. So as you can see, we're in the public comment period for the 2045 plan. We just released the draft plan to the public on October 16th, and we will be accepting public comments on the plan through November 20th. The board will be considering the plan for adoption at their December 9th meeting. So that is going to be a big milestone for us. So as the Vice Chairwoman mentioned, we have a 3-part presentation for you today. We're finally ready to share that draft plan with you. So I'm going to go over some outreach stats, and then Alex will follow, and he's going to actually walk you through the cost feasible plan and share some highlights. And then you will hear from Laura on the congestion management process. And that's really how we're going to keep track of the region's progress as the 2045 plan is put into place. So next slide, please. Some key outreach results. When we look at public participation for our long range plan, we really have a twofold goal. One is to help educate the public about transportation planning. As you all know, it's a very complex topic, and there's not really a lot of common knowledge out there amongst most people about how our world works. So we always want to try and educate people on how long range planning works. And the other main goal that we always have is to get input from the public, and let them know that, one, they do have a voice in the process, and then let them know how they can participate so that they can give us input. So when we look at those kind of teachable moments, we call these significant interactions. These are, how many chances have we had to actually have a conversation with someone about long range planning, whether it's at an in-person event, at a presentation, perhaps they took time to watch one of our videos online or participate in some of our webinars, or maybe they've gone to our website and actually looked at some of the documents that we have there. So that's what we count as significant interactions. And these results that you see here are from November of last year through September of this year. And we will be updating these as we update our final report. Because as you know, participation is going to go all the way through the end of November. So as far as direct input, we've had about 1,800 people so far who have given us direct input through surveys or polls. They've actually given us their opinion on some aspect of transportation, and we're continuing to get direct input. We already have a flow of public comments coming in on the draft plan, so that's a very good thing. Future generations are always a focus for us. We had a really active youth outreach program for this plan. We were able, as you all know, we developed a new youth activity workbook during this 2045 plan, and that's become kind of our main educational piece for youth. And so almost 1,000 young people have received that in our community. And we also continue to use social media to expand our reach and our message. And so we've had about 76,000 social media impressions on posts specifically related to the 2045 plan. And that just means how many times people have received our messages through their social media channels. So I am happy to report that we are on track to meet our public participation objectives. So that's all really good news. We do have details on strategies and exactly how we met our objectives. Those are all in a draft public participation report that is on our website, and I'll show you where exactly to find that in just a couple of minutes. So next slide, please. Just as a reminder of some of the common themes that we heard from our public input. So, people expect the transportation system to achieve a lot of different goals. And as you know, we set 5 major goal areas for our 2045 plan. And when we asked folks to prioritize these, they had a really hard time with that. So they considered all these goal areas to be equally important across the board. When we compared our input we were getting pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, we did see a little bit of a shift in which goals Central Floridians valued the most. So before the pandemic, we were seeing access and connectivity as the top goal. But as we moved into the pandemic, investment and economy became the top concern. And that makes a lot of sense considering the current state of the economy. When we looked at the top desired changes to the transportation system, what do people want to see? We saw really strong support for more transit, and that's both bus and rail. So people wanted to see more frequent service that goes to more places, and also see better first and last mile connections to transit so they can get from their destinations to the transit system. And we also saw very strong support for the use of technology in the transportation system, particularly the use of smart signals to help manage congestion. So people are big fans of that as well. Next slide, please. So as some of you know, I have been with MetroPlan Orlando for quite a while. This is actually my 3rd long-range plan with our organization. And I can tell you that we've always taken public input into account and sought public input, but this plan in particular really takes that input into account more than ever before. So I wanted to share some examples with you of how that public feedback has fed directly into our technical planning process, and we have actually made decisions on the technical side based on public input. And I also wanted to take this opportunity to thank all of you, our committee members, for being involved in this process. You have been a really important part of our process as well. As the people who know us best, you've given us some really good suggestions and asked excellent questions that helped us really kind of hone the planning process. So we really appreciate your involvement as well. So to give you some examples of how that public feedback influenced our plan decisions, one area was the weighting of performance measures. As you all know, with each of our goal areas, we had a specific set of performance measures that were used to score projects in the 2045 plan. And our original intent was to weight those performance measures. But when we got the feedback from the public that really all the goal areas were equally as important, we decided not to move forward with that weighting. Another area is specific funding allocations in the plan. We have actually increased the amount of money set aside to support projects that get at the public's desired changes to the transportation system. So things like premium transit, technology investments, complete streets to make those first last mile connections. You'll hear more about those funding allocations from Alex in just a few minutes. Scenario planning, as y'all know, this is the first plan we've done that incorporates scenario planning. And you all helped us with this a lot. One big one was that when we started all this, we actually, the pandemic had just started to hit when we rolled out our scenarios. And you said, you know, wait a minute, maybe the future's not always going to be so rosy and beautiful for Central Florida. You know, maybe we should look at a version of the future that perhaps considers that low growth scenario. So we took your input and we adjusted the scenarios that we had for the 2045 plan. And you also helped us with our strategies as well. So we refined our strategies based on the input that we received. And we also adjusted some of our technical methodology in response to feedback as well from our stakeholders. One example of that is with our bicycle needs. We used the bicycle level of traffic stress to analyze those needs. And you know, you told us you thought we should account for daily traffic in some of those. So we made that adjustment. Other areas is, you know, we looked at utility corridor potential for bike ped connections when we looked at our needs as well. So those are just some of the ways that we took the feedback into account, and we're really proud of this. So this 2045 plan, we feel really reflects the public's desires. So next slide, please. So where can you find all this stuff about the 2045 plan? So we have a landing page on our website. This is the URL on the screen, metroplanorlando.org/2045 draft plan. And so on this landing page, you will find several items. One, the most important one, the cost feasible plan actual document, that PDF is on there. You will find information on how to comment. I'll go over a little bit of that. You will find excerpts of the project lists. There are many different project categories. There are many pages of lists in that cost feasible plan document. So we broke out all those project lists so that you can access those separate lists more easily. And you'll also find the draft public participation report on this site as well. So please do share this URL with your networks, your contacts at your organizations, so that people within your organizations can take a look and give us feedback as well. Next slide, please. Public comment period. So as I mentioned, we are in the comment period right now. There are 4 different ways that members of the public can give comments. So if you go to that landing page, one of the things you'll find on there is an online comment form where people can just type right into the page and send us their comments through our website. They can also just shoot us a good old email with their feedback. We are going to be having an event on November 9th, and that is the bottom graphic that you see on this slide. It's going to be called 2045 Plan, The Reveal. We're going to hit some of the highlights of the 2045 plan. And so we will also be taking public comment at this meeting. So members of the public will be able to give comments just like they do at our committee and board meetings via Zoom. And we have also set up a phone line to receive phone message public comments. So somebody can call up. If they don't want to type it all out, they can leave us a message on our public comment line. So that's all I have for you today. We do hope that you will take a look at that landing page. Again, metroplanorlando.org/2045 draft plan. And please do make sure that you register for our November 9th webinar. So that's all I have, Madam Chairman. I'll be happy to take any questions.
I don't know if he has a question, but I noticed that Renzo raised his hand at the beginning of the presentation.
No, I'm okay, thanks. I was just trying to check in.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I guess we don't have any questions. Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you.
Alex, I believe you're up next.
Sounds good. Good morning, everyone. Just giving me a second here to take control of the screen. So as Lisa gets that, pulled up, This will probably be, I think, the 10th presentation that I've had, to our advisory committees. So you've heard a lot about methodologies over, the past year, about how we're doing business and planning differently than we ever have before. And what you'll see in today's presentation, and as you review the plan, you'll also start to see a lot of that. And that's really going to be the emphasis and what I'm going to highlight as part of today's presentation. So take control here. Thank you, Lisa. So back to the planning process, like Cynthia said, we started public involvement a little over a year ago. We started the technical process of the plan about 24 months ago as it relates to socioeconomic data development in coordination with FDOT as it relates to travel demand modeling and more of the district-wide growth management processes. But we started off with a data-driven plan. That was our end in mind. We were going to do business differently. And we've been through each of these 4 steps with you. As Cynthia mentioned, we've had agency and public participation critical and integral to every part of this planning process. And we have modified our processes to respond to the feedback that we've received, in most cases in real time. Again, the planning approach, very different than past plans. If I was here 4 years ago, 10 years ago, we'd be talking about one long list of widening projects and maybe, a couple context sensitive type projects, but, they were likely widening projects too. But it's really a new day. We've talked about that, early on. So as we're looking at a cost feasible plan and as we're looking at funding allocations, it really is more about serving needs and following through with those opportunities that we have identified that are all consistent with our regional goals and objectives. So we're sticking by those. We spent a lot of time talking about what's most important in vision and goals and objectives and how we want to accomplish that through targets. And we really use that, like I said, really as a lens and a compass, to move forward with the planning steps. But we're at a time in the process now where we're in the cost feasible plan. And I've presented to you many times about goals and methods and preliminary findings, but the cost feasible plan is really where it all comes together. And I can summarize it really with these 5 steps here. We've talked a lot about needs, and we've spent a lot of, and we've used a lot of different methodologies and approaches to really identify those needs. And we use big data and traditional tools to identify those needs, as well as sourcing visions and desires from our local partners as well as from the state. Then we use those goals and objectives and the criteria that we had developed consistent with those objectives to really assess and prioritize those projects. So we have a long list of preliminary needs, and we began to shortlist and prioritize those long lists based on the criteria and based on their eligibility for funding. So at the end of the day, a cost feasible plan gets implemented into our shorter term planning documents, the prioritized project list, in the transportation improvement program. So we need to ensure that we're developing cost feasible lists that can truly be implemented within eligible sources. And that's an important part. We've forecasted, federal and state sources and coordinated with our local partners to identify those local revenue sources based on existing levied mechanisms, as well as an illustrative forecast. Step 4 is really where it starts to say, where do we have flexibility in the federal and state funding process? Where are we able to assert our urbanized area desires and vision and direct and allocate how those funds are spent? I'm going to talk about that in a second, but we were really responsive, especially as Cynthia said. We heard a lot through the public participation process, and as we went through the scenario planning process and the needs assessment process, certain types of needs, certain types of programs, really, rose to the top of saying, if we don't strategically and targetedly fund these projects, they likely will not get done. So you'll see that as I talk about budget allocations. Lastly, that's step 5, long range planning, or, the metropolitan transportation planning process is about, identifying that vision, identifying our needs. But at the end of the day, the federal requirement, we have to have a cost feasible plan of projects based on existing revenue sources. And that's what I'm going to present to you today. Before I jump into those project lists, I want to cover these 3 topics briefly. The first is existing priorities. So we've done plans of years past, and like we've talked about, use different methodologies, very different. past plans was all about volume to capacity ratios, little consideration for our other objectives, especially on the quantitative side. But we still included those existing priorities, both from our prioritized project lists, as well as from the transportation improvement program. So all of those needs, all of those projects that were identified made the long list. We then use that to prioritize, we use our new criteria to prioritize. So they didn't get lost in the cracks, nothing fell through, but we did acknowledge that we need to use a new process to analyze and rank projects that are consistent with our new goals, measures, and performance targets. But we did keep some projects, moving through the transportation improvement program. And that was projects with a project development and environmental phase, the PD&E phase, or any phases subsequent to that preliminary PD&E phase, like preliminary engineering, right-of-way construction. So when you look at our cost feasible list, those projects that were in our TIP that had those phases funded are our top MTP priorities, and we're acknowledging that we're going to fund those projects first. And you'll likely see that as we look at the budget allocation tables, as unfunded phases from the TIP go into the first plan year or the first plan phase of our long range plan of the 2045 MTP. The next funding policy or key topic is really how we're spending our eligible federal and state revenues. And this is where we have the flexibility. I think it's important to say that we've leveraged the board's existing DDR, that district dedicated revenue policy for premium transit. And as well as this is where we've really leveraged our board's TMA-SU and transportation alternatives program funds. But as I mentioned, as part of needs assessment and scenario planning and hearing from the public, we also identified some new programs as part of the MTP. This includes 10% of funds for off-state highway system widening project. So we saw a lot of needs off the state highway system. We're identifying a program here where we're using 10% of our other arterial funds to fund off-system widening projects. So we see that helping our local partners, solve and address some of their growth and capacity needs. Again, 30%, our board has a policy of up to 30% of DDR funds can go to premium transit. Also coming out of our needs assessment was the identification of critical sidewalk gaps. How do we fund those? So we're dedicating $1 million a year to fund and fill critical sidewalk gaps. That program is actually going to be really coordinated through the technical advisory committee, through this committee annually, beginning in fiscal year 26. But as soon as we adopt the plan starting next year, we're going to start coming together to really forge out some of these programs. We've identified and boxed the funds for some of these programs where we're leaving the actual implementation and keeping some agility in the process by making those annual TAC and TISMO advisory committee program. So that's where we'll have some call for projects and we'll prioritize year to year for those project types. And finally, I think something to highlight, and it came out of our connected and automated vehicle readiness study, was the need to continue demonstration of these connected, automated, electric, and shared technologies. So we're identifying $250,000 a year for these types of demonstration projects. Again, that's going to be coordinated through TAC and TISMO, so we can identify some candidate projects and fund those beginning in fiscal 26. The next funding key topic is really adoption by reference. Long-range plans traditionally and primarily focus on federal and state-funded revenues and projects, but there are some cases where we are adopting plans and needs by reference. And in some instances, and examples here is FDOT's performance management goals and objectives. We've included that, in our goal. As we developed our goals and objectives, obviously we considered those, but we're also adopting theirs explicitly by reference. And you can see that in our goals and objectives appendix. As it relates to SIS funding, that's the strategic intermodal system. So FDOT designated corridors that serve statewide mobility and freight movement needs. FDOT is currently updating their 2045 SIS plan, both the cost feasible plan as well as their interim and unfunded needs plan. As soon as we have that, we'll be updating our SIS related projects. And as it relates to our district, or rather our MPO area, it's really I-4 and a couple other connectors. But that's the primary focus there. Toll funded projects by the Central Florida Expressway Authority and Florida's Turnpike Enterprise are really discretionary and supplemental to our long range planning process. But those are big projects that move a lot of people and transform community. So those are included here. Both Central Florida Expressway Authority is currently updating as well their 2045 master plan. They're just in the beginning phases of that. As that plan is finalized and adopted by the Central Florida Expressway Board, we will modify our plan accordingly. Public-private partnerships or any form of partnership are also encapsulated in the plan. These are things like, high-speed rail operations that are likely to be, commercially funded or commercially operated. We identify those projects in the plan because they connect us to the larger state and other metropolitan areas, and intercity travel is a federal requirement for the long-range planning process. So that's included there. But it is important to note we don't identify alignments for these particular projects. They still need to go through the proper channels and phases to identify those. So as you start to see those types of projects in our plan, you'll probably see wider bands or swaths to identify a corridor that which it may go through, but not the actual alignment that's determined during, PD&E and the design phases. Also adopted by reference are locally funded projects, supplemental, and they feed into the state and federal aid system. So they're important to note, but adopted by reference. What we are actually adopting here as our cost feasible plan, we have to include everything to show that full transportation future, that big picture of all transportation revenues and improvements. But our focus really is on the federally and state funded revenues in the associated projects. So we have, like I said, about 11 to 13 project lists. Previous plans had 1 or 2, and that's because we only focused really on the national highway system capacity. But this is a new plan, a new day, and we believe this will help us manage our prioritized project list and year-to-year programming a lot more efficiently and strategically as we're going to be following the plan. I'm not going to go through every list, but I will be walking you through what we call our budget allocation tables. And I'm going to do that here over the next couple slides. So for each table in the cost feasible plan, whether it's state funded, toll funded, locally funded, we've identified a budget allocation table. And federal guidance requires that metropolitan transportation's plans show an accounting of available funds and the identification of project cost by phase in the year of expenditure. And I'll talk about that in a second. But for every budget allocation table, you will see at the very top a program description and an accounting of available revenues. And that will help, as this really is a ledger and yet kind of considered a checkbook, as we're allocating available resources into the future. So that's at the top of every table. Like I said, a federal requirement is identifying the costs for all phases, and we have to apply inflation in a minute, but we have to first understand what is that cost today. And we acknowledge that we can't afford everything today, and that's why we have to apply inflation of cost into the future. DOT has set inflation factors that they expect us to use as part of our 2045 planning process. All MPOs across the state use these inflation factors, and it's really just an acknowledgement. And I think we can all agree that the future is likely to be more expensive than it is today. My financial advisor reminds me of that every time I meet with them. But as we look at the budget allocation table, like I said, it is a ledger of available resources and funding prioritized projects. Where we have to, in that year of expenditure, we can't afford everything within one individual year, but also sometimes we can't afford to fund a project within one 5-year band. So at the very bottom of this particular slide, you will see for this project, we're able to fund the project development and environmental phase. It's actually in the current TIP. But we're going to finish that project as part of the long range plan, as I mentioned, and we're able to fund the preliminary engineering, the right-of-way phase, as well as environmental mitigation. But based on the available resources, I think we have a little over 24.63 after we fund that environmental phase. And that next phase is construction. It costs $29+ million. We're actually have to roll those funds and move that phase into the next year. So as you read the budget allocation tables, they really read left to right. And as funds in phases show up in a column year, whether it's plan year one, plan period 1, plan period 2, or plan period 3, that's where that phase is considered and that project is considered fully cost feasible. Like I said, we can't afford everything, finite revenues, infinite needs and desires. And there comes a time on every list, a point on every list where we can't afford a project or a particular phase of a given project. And in this example here, you'll see that, we're able to fund, for this project, which is a safety improvement, the preliminary engineering and the little right-of-way that's required, but we're not able to afford everything else because we only have $1 million remaining in 2045, and $1 million with that level of inflation is probably about $500,000 or less. So that's actually where we start drawing the line of what's cost feasible and what's not. And then what you'll see is all remaining phases for those projects are going to show up in that far right column, which is unfunded needs. So that's where we draw the line of what's cost feasible and what is an unfunded need. Pretty simple. As revenues and priorities change, that list ebbs and flows. But that's a way of reading our budget allocation tables and understanding how we're inflating costs to account for inflation of the future. So with all of that being said, that's a little 101 on how to read the tables if you're not familiar with them. Now I'm going to provide some highlights quickly about some of the lists, and I'll let you kind of dive in to the list in your local agency review. But as it relates to the interstate highway system and to strategic intermodal system funding, we're looking at, like I said, the SIS 2040 plan and their interim year plans. And we also have our prioritized project list, which identifies MetroPlan Orlando's interstate and strategic intermodal system priorities. As it relates to the 2040 SIS plan, I remind you the 2045 plan, SIS plan is ongoing. They're currently showing all the ultimate configurations within our region, cost feasible. Kirkman to 434, what we know as I-4 Ultimate, obviously cost feasible. That's in our current work program under construction, wrapping up in the next couple years. But the phases north or east and the western and southern phases are currently cost feasible, but subject to change, as FDOT and FDOT Central Office updates the SIS 2045 cost feasible and unfunded needs. So stay tuned on that. As soon as those plans are updated, we'll be modifying and coming to you with that information. As it looks to our national highway and state highway system, so this is our traditional funding pod, those federal aid roads. This is where we have all types of funding or all types of project types on the state highway system. So we have complete streets projects, we have widening projects, operation safety, as well as those ITS technology type projects. Based on the federal revenues that we have available to us, we have about $2.6 billion. And we're actually able to fund a lot of those projects, on these priorities. Still have some unfunded needs, 96 million, but we're able to accomplish a lot. And there's a lot of smaller projects on this list, on these lists than in years past as well. So that's why we are able to accomplish more, less widening, more context, more operation and safety improvements. Couple highlights here. We have the John Young Parkway project, Osceola County, Pleasant Hill, Portage, it's cost feasible, the 6-lane, as well as the urban interchange included there. The complete streets project, 434, Franklin to 417, as well as the Robinson project in downtown Orlando is deemed cost feasible based on the forecasts. And all of those, like I said, are in table 9, or I didn't say, but at the top right of each of these slides, you'll see a table number, and that corresponds to the tables that we sent out to you for your review last week in my reminder email earlier this week. So table 10 is our off-state highway system capacity. Based on funding eligibility, we're able to pull up to 10% of our other arterial funds. That's about $298 million over the life of the plan. And we're funding these local priorities based on the regional prioritization. The reason this slide has no unfunded needs is because if it was unfunded here, we actually move those projects over to our locally funded list. So this is our way of using federal and state funds to advance high quality capacity improvements on off the state highway system, but acknowledging we're not keeping a prioritized list for these particular projects. We're going to move those remaining projects over to our locally funded project list, so they don't kind of lose sight of their priorities and where those projects need and how those projects need to be funded. The next list is our systems management and operations list. Similar to the current prioritized project list, it includes things like safety and operational projects. But what we also included here, and it's what we're already doing, is the annual signal retiming. That's something MetroPlan currently manages and coordinates. That shows up in our Unified Planning Work Program. We're showing that there. A couple highlight projects: the Universal Boulevard technology ITS improvements. But I think what's really notable here is, and I mentioned it earlier, is we had the CIV readiness study. We did the ITS master plan, and that really identified needs, but also some strategies. And we saw those plans and said, the MTP is the place where we can actually target and fund those programs. So we have both our annual signal retiming program, but also that automated connected electric and shared vehicle demonstration program. So that's going to be managed by TAC and TISMO annually, and we'll talk about that in a couple more, kind of framing out that program in a couple months. But what we're doing here in the 2045 plan is actually kind of locking in those funds and then giving acknowledging that we'll be planning those funds year to year as we have done in the past. And that's intended to really be a seed program for our local partners, so we can start, really ramping up and start seeing really what that autonomous and connected and shared technology can impact our local communities. Complete streets, near and dear to most people here. Table 12, of the cost feasible plan. This is all complete streets off the state highway system. Based on our board's TMA, or our Surface Transportation Fund policy, we spend or allocate $203 million over the course of the plan. A lot of unfunded needs, though, $148 million, but we are able to fund some really high quality projects with what we currently have available to us. East Church in Longwood, the Corinne Drive project, the Central Avenue project in Osceola County, the North Street project, kind of in the Altamont Seminole County area, as well as Buenaventura Boulevard in Osceola County. So complete streets projects, those are 5. There's dozens more, all found in Table 12. They were ranked and organized based on those regional performance measures. So a lot of good complete streets projects funded, but definitely have a significant level of unfunded needs as well in this category. Our active transportation needs, pedestrian, bicycle, and trails infrastructure needs, are found in Table 13. And this includes everything from sidewalks and shared use paths, but we've also included those grade separating kind of trail crossings. Again, based on our board's policy, $108 million over the life of the plan. And similar to complete streets, we have a significant unfunded need. And a lot of that, is in critical sidewalk gaps, but as well as, some of our desired for other shared use paths and other type of bicycle infrastructure. But, like I said, notable here, we are targeted funding those critical sidewalk gaps. We're going to be working with this committee, in beginning in next year, to start setting those priorities. So we've identified the critical gaps as part of the long range planning process, but we're going to work with you as a committee to start really prioritizing and looking at kind of the implementation timeline for those, because there's a lot going on some of these corridors, and some of them are locally funded, developer funded, and we want to make sure that we're framing that program up to be one that we can truly implement year to year, and that will begin in fiscal year 26. We're also funding, the East-West Trail Connector, a lot of phases on the Shingle Creek, both in Osceola and Orange counties. So check that out on table 13. The E. Williamson Trail, in Longwood. And something also notable that we're really ingraining in this 2045 plan is our school mobility program. So that's MetroPlan Orlando's complement to what you know as the Safe Routes, the FDOT's Safe Routes to School program. So that's our way of funding projects that are not selected through the Safe Routes to School program, that we're still funding and providing those safe, pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure for children to get to school safely. Regional transits found on table 14 and 15. 14 provides an estimated revenue forecast based on existing sources. Table 15 starts to look at available capital and operating or capital projects and service provision. Similar to years past, we have had a cost feasible transit list, and it's been made up of fixed route, commuter rail, and premium services. This plan, as I've mentioned and I've talked about in previous presentations, really identified and focused on the absolute need for better and improved operations infrastructure. We need this type of infrastructure to expand transit service into the future, but there's an absolute need for it today to improve efficiency and kind of reduce those deadhead, inefficient movements in operating a regional transit system in an area the size of other states, smaller states. So, based on our revenue forecast, about $2.5 billion total revenue. And with all those unfunded needs, especially based on our desire to have premium and enhanced transit service, we have a significant unfunded need here. But I think what I need to focus on is really the highlights, because I think those are important to know and to be really clear on as it relates to this plan. We're able to afford Link's fixed route service at its current operations. So what's out there today is what we can afford into the future based on existing sources. We're accounting for the inflation of costs into the future, but even with that being said, we can only afford what we currently have. Similar situation to Sunrail service level of service. What we currently have today is what is forecasted to be cost feasible into the future unless our revenue forecast changes. But what we can afford are those new southern and northern operation bases as part of the plan, which will help Links be more efficient in providing that transit service. And we're also able to afford parking expansion at the 3 Sunrail stations. MetroPlan Orlando is going to be studying that with our local partners next year to really kind of get those projects off the ground. But based on some of the challenges that those stations are currently experiencing with parking capacity, that's something that's been identified as a top need and a high priority. And then a big caveat here, that last project, we can afford the capital funding. So we have enough capital funds to pay for Sunrail Phase 3 and other service enhancements to the Links system. But we don't have the necessary or matching operations and maintenance funds, which typically comes, from the local side. So the Fed and state revenues can help us get the projects off the ground, construction, operations ready, but there has to be that operations and maintenance revenues available to fund those projects. So in this case, we're leaving some funds on the table because of that, but at least it's an acknowledgement that we can afford at least the capital phases of these projects by the coaches, the locomotive, the buses as it relates to the enhancements and the bus stations and stops, but not pay for the operations, the driver, the fuel, and other maintenance aspects of operating a transit system. So I believe that was important to note, and I would be remiss not to be very explicit with that with you guys. Lastly, is our local revenue. Like I said earlier, this is kind of adopted by reference and complementary to the process. We worked with our local government partners, many of you, to develop county level forecasts of existing sources as well as illustrative sources. Based on federal expectations, we have to use those existing sources. And that's why you saw some of the transit picture look different than years past. It's because in past plans, we use very aggressive illustrative sources that have not really come to fruition. So, we have to kind of take a step back, stick with the forecast of existing sources, but we still have that illustrative source, which obviously, tackles a lot more of our priorities. But this plan, again, an existing source-based plan, needs were identified, in coordination similar to the process of our, regional priorities through that data-driven and kind of multimodal planning process. But as it relates to these lists, 16, 17, and 18, our locally funded list, like I said, they are complementary and discretionary to our long range, the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, and the ultimate implementation, ranking, prioritization of these projects is really subject to our local government agencies. We've ranked those projects or assessed those projects based on the regional criteria, the regional goals and performance measures, but we acknowledge that the ultimate authority for implementing and funding those projects is in the hands of our local government partners. Again, lots of needs across the board. A lot of those can be solved, when you look at, different types of funding initiatives that we've heard about over the past years. A lot of these needs can be mitigated and resolved with those additional resources. So these are consistent with, our local government plans and those comprehensive plans. So keep that in mind. But again, discretionary but notable, just given that these local networks feed into the higher level networks, and we can't plan that system in a vacuum. Bottlenecks become bottlenecks down the road. Really quick, just wrapping up. It's a $24.3 billion plan with a B, but we almost have as equal of unfunded needs. So that's something to bear in mind. We're going to accomplish a lot. We've really structured this plan to accomplish the things that we want, but it still has to be funding constrained. And I think that's the real takeaway here is we do have a lot of wins. We're programming and allocating our funds more strategically, more in line with the things that we say are important to us. But we all have to acknowledge at this point, we can't afford everything, based on our current existing funding sources. So with that being said, I appreciate your time. I've sent a few emails out to the advisory committees, with some additional detail as it relates to your review. All of that information are found in those links, at metroplanorlando.org/2045 draft plan. Our public comment period, like Cynthia mentioned, for members of the public goes through November 20th, but we do ask, if all possible, if we can have agency feedback a week in advance, November 3rd. And really, as I mentioned in my email, the sooner the better, so we can iterate and be responsive to your needs, and make sure that we can encapsulate those comments into this plan if all possible. With that being said, that's really all I have today. I appreciate everyone's help. As Cynthia mentioned earlier on, it really has been a group effort in building out this plan. So with that, I'll answer any questions, and yeah, thank you.
Do we have any questions?
Yes, this is Renzo.
Okay.
So if I could, thanks, Alex. That was a lot of information, and appreciate your effort. I also received the spreadsheet that you sent out with all the Orange County projects, but are we going to have the report, or at least the draft report as you have it now, what you were showing on the screen, or is, because I'd be interested in taking a look at the state and federal system as well. And then secondly, I just want to touch base with you maybe offline on the available revenue between 2025 and 45. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page there, because I don't want to put something out in the public that we have put out in the past and probably will do so in the next year or so. So I just want to make sure that our numbers are close or match up as best they can.
Sorry, I had a 2-year-old bust in. Wouldn't be a Zoom meeting without that. But absolutely, Renzo. If you want to reach out to me, by phone or email, Nick and I can definitely, work with you to address any any feedback or issues you may have with the plan as it stands.
But do you have, is the report that you were showing available or not? And again, really want to focus on the state and federal system.
Right. Yeah. The report that I'm showing, yeah, that was sent out. It's on the website, the metroplanorlando.org/2045. The full cost feasible plan and the individual lists are also posted there, including the locally funded project list. So yeah, all of that is publicly available.
Okay, because I was just looking at the spreadsheet that you had sent. All right, thanks.
Anyone else? I don't see any raised hands.
See, Josh has his hand raised, virtual hand raised.
Okay. You see more than I do.
Great presentation, Alex. I really like the way that the tables are laid out, showing the cost feasible, and then right next to it the unfunded needs. Makes it a lot, I think, more reader friendly and user friendly. I was wondering also, is this presentation, will this be able to be available to the TAC members and TISMA members? I think it'll be helpful in our continued review of the tables that you had sent out earlier.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, so the presentation is actually being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel for kind of the editorial comments I make, but the slides are absolutely can be sent out, post meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Brett has raised his hand.
Hey, Alex, maybe I missed you talking about it, but when you showed that slide, I think maybe in the second or third slide from the end, the revenues for the 20-year period for Seminole County were much lower. Did that assume that there was not going to be another infrastructure sales tax, or what were the basis for that assumption?
For the revenue forecast, it took so for existing so those funds for Seminole County for the available capital funds, there was the assumption made to continue the sales tax in that forecast. That was not a action taken by our local government, by Seminole County, but for our forecasting purposes, it was to continue existing levied sources into the future. So to really perpetuate existing sources. So for Seminole County, that is the infrastructure sales tax, as well as any revenues that would be generated from impact fees.
That number seemed really low. It said 80 million over 20 years, and the sales tax is collecting, I think they're getting 75% of about 750 million now, somewhere in the ballpark of closer to 550 million over 10 years. So that number didn't seem correct.
This is Nick. Let me just jump in. So the sales tax, when it expires, it's in our plan through the expiration, which is I want to say 3 years. I have to go back to the table, Brent. But most of the funds are just impact fee based, which is why Seminole counties looks much lower than, say, Orange counties and Osceola counties. So that was the only available source for transportation capital projects that we could put forward in the plan, since the sales tax hasn't been voted on to be extended past the expiration date.
Okay, that makes sense, man.
If I could interrupt, this is Renzo again. So I really, the concern that I had is the same as Brett's, because our regular annual CIP is close to $100 million a year. So I'm not sure how you just showed the 280 some million over the course of 20 years. That just didn't make sense to me. If you're just looking at impact fee revenues, I'm not sure that that's the right approach to forecasting the revenue over the next 20 years from Orange County. So that's why maybe we can have an offline conversation, but that number does not seem right.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to have a conversation. We just didn't want to assume general revenues past a certain time going towards transportation because that's not really in our realm of funding. It was more for complementary purposes of where we draw the line, but we'd happy to work with you guys on making sure that we have that an accurate forecast in the future to draw that cost feasible line of local projects.
Yeah, and the other issue is, you know, we had talked during the Orange County Mayor's sales tax initiative, and I thought we were going to have a with and without scenario. So I think it's important that, again, the same message is shown both from MetroPlan and Orange County, because again, I don't want to have dueling numbers. I think that's problematic.
We agree, and we want to make sure that we are speaking the same story. So that's what we were trying to do. Yep.
Okay, are there any other comments? Okay, thank you, Alex. So should we move on to Laura?
All right, yes, I'm ready for you. Thank you, Lee, and good morning, everybody. So I'm going to be wrapping up our three-part MTP presentation series this morning with the final presentation on our congestion management process update that we've been working on this year. The CMP will be up for approval along with the MTP at our December meeting. Next slide, please, Lisa. So today's presentation, I'm really going to focus on those final 4 actions I have highlighted there in the FHWA 8 action process model we've been using to help us develop the CMP. This second half of the process is where we analyze our existing conditions to determine where there were existing issues that are affecting congestion, identified some potential strategies for mitigating those issues, and then we've recommended some strategies that should be considered for implementation to meet the congestion management goals that we've set out. Next slide, please. Speaking of goals. So today I'm going to briefly review the analyses that we performed as part of the CMP for each goal area and what the findings were. And then I'll be presenting the strategies that are recommended as part of the CMP update. For the CMP, we are not recommending any specific projects, but more strategy types that we should consider to try and alleviate congestion and really meet these goals that we've set out. Over 30 performance measures were identified as part of the CMP update exercise, as you may remember from my last presentation. And we chose a handful to analyze to help us determine where there are existing issues that are either causes of congestion or that are impacted by congestion. And I'll briefly review each of these. Next slide. So we can go ahead and get started with safety and security. And in this goal area, what we really wanted to look at was not just where there are safety issues. We know that's safety continues to play a role in congestion levels throughout the region, but we really wanted to look at what types of roadways we were seeing issues on. And so one of the analyses that we looked at was identifying what those top 25 segments were for fatal and incapacitating injury crashes, and looking at the facility types where we're seeing those crashes. And so for the top 25 fatality related segments, which are shown in blue on the map here, the top facility types that we're seeing, and it's probably no surprise, were our rural principal arterials, as well as our interstates. And then for the combined fatality and incapacitating injuries, which are the sort of the lighter green, the top facility types were our minor arterial urban and then our principal arterials. Next slide. So in addition to looking at just sort of total crashes, we also looked at which segments we were seeing the highest crash rates on. And for the fatal incapacitating injury crashes, the top segments were primarily our local urban roadways and our collectors. And the same was true for total number of crashes as well. Next slide, please. So for our reliability analysis, we focused on identifying areas within the region with unreliable travel times. Our travel time reliability was measured using our streetlight data and our MetroPlan primary network, which covers all the roads in the national highway system, as well as our minor arterials and collectors. The heat map shown here displays the most unreliable areas in sort of the darker pinks. I don't think there are any surprises. We've boxed those out here with the most unreliable areas sort of occurring near our downtowns, our entertainment districts, and our major employment areas. Next slide. For the access and connectivity goal area, we evaluated for three things. First, identifying auto and transit access to our key destinations, and then our activity centers. And then we also looked at bike and ped access to essential services. So this slide shows where we have access within a 20-minute auto or transit trip to some key destinations, which are defined. They're shown in the red here, but basically the two airports are major theme parks, as well as the convention center. And really the major takeaway here is in general, transit access to these key destinations is much, much poorer than auto access. We've sort of delineated those transit access in the boxes because it's a little hard to see on the graphic. Next slide, please. And then looking at our activity centers, we sort of ran a similar analysis looking at 30-minute access or the travel shed for auto and transit for the activity centers that are listed here on the slide. And the access is more far-flung just because there are more activity centers, but sort of the takeaway is the same, where our transit access is much, much poorer than auto access. And so we looked at some strategies we could pursue to try and improve that. Next slide. And then the final thing that we evaluated for access and connectivity was our bike ped access to essential services, which includes grocery stores, markets, government buildings, parks, schools, and healthcare. For this analysis, we used Lotus, which is a planning database that was developed by the RPC that overlays transportation and land use over our region. And the results shown here basically show that about 24% of the population has a proximity score higher than 8. And that proximity score correlates to a 10-minute bicycle or walk ride. So 24 is pretty low. And if you look at it, you can basically see that the access is primarily available sort of in downtown areas, and then the other areas that we have very focused development. I know for me personally, looking at this, the area where I live in is not highlighted, and I can attest that I cannot get anywhere within a 10-minute bicycle ride or walk. Next slide, please. For our health and environment goal area, the analysis reviewed the system-wide air quality index, or the AQI, from 2015 to 2019. The AQI is an index for reporting daily air quality and uses a scale from 0 to 500. The AQI value, the higher the AQI value, the greater the level of air pollution and the greater the health concern. So as noted on the slide here, an AQI under 100 correlates to either good or moderate air quality, while an AQI value over 300 represents a hazardous air quality. Just as a point of reference, I looked it up, and the AQI in the areas of California that have been recently pretty ravaged by fires, the AQI was above 300 for several weeks running. Here in Florida, our AQI values are generally not greater than 100, and we never had a value greater than 200. And here within our region, over the 5-year analysis period from 2015 to 2019, the average AQI was hovering around 50. So we're doing pretty well. Next slide, please. And then for our final goal area, investment and economy, the analysis identified the reliability of the regional visitor emphasis corridors, and we defined those as corridors carrying 60% or greater visitor traffic based on FDOT's visitor study that wrapped up last year. And we use streetlight data again for this analysis. Of the visitor emphasis corridors, there are a scattering of unreliable segments that are clustered around the key destinations, which we have highlighted here in pink. The exact causes of decongestion aren't known, but the contributing factors are most likely due to oversaturated conditions and points of conflict like intersections and driveway densities. Next slide, please. So having wrapped that up, we moved into looking at what types of strategies we could recommend that we as a region pursue over this next 5-year period as a way to alleviate some of this congestion, and we put those into sort of 3 buckets: strategies that can improve safety conditions, strategies that can optimize system capacity, and strategies that can promote a mode shift away from single occupant vehicles. So starting with that first bucket here on the slide, the primary strategies that are aimed at improving safety conditions sort of focus on reducing the occurrence of or severity of crashes in order to decrease the incidence of non-recurring congestion. Some of the recommendations within the CMP include expanding our notification systems to utilize dynamic messaging systems or mobile applications and connected vehicle technologies to implement queue warning systems, dynamic detours, and similar after an incident. We're also recommending expanding the use of integrated corridor management to continue to redirect traffic for major incidents and events. Advancing the role of predictive analytics and assisting with incident management. And for those of you who are on the TISMO Zoom meeting, Eric mentioned that MetroPlan is working with UCF and District 5 on a tool to help with using predictive analytics to help with crash management. And then we also are recommending the implementation of some of the countermeasures that were identified in the first phase of the bicycle and pedestrian safety action plans that were completed by MetroPlan last year. These countermeasures are aimed at reducing bike and pedestrian crashes and include things like installing better lighting or bicycle lanes where appropriate, as well as evaluating speed reductions and potentially looking at some driver and cyclist education campaigns. Next slide, please. So for the next bucket, we have our strategies that are to optimize system capacity. And on this slide, we're highlighting some of the ones that relate to freeway management and arterial management. Under our freeway management strategies, we recommend for consideration introducing rent metering. This is currently planned to be a feature on I-4 once the managed lanes project is operational. Further consideration of managed lanes where appropriate in other places on the system. This can include things like truck-only lanes, BRT lanes, reversible lanes, express lanes, and of course toll lanes, as well as looking at potential interchange improvements where needed to reduce bottlenecks. For the arterial management strategies, we're recommending continuing the signal retiming program, which has been very successful to date, expanding our actively monitored system to continue to use technology to improve the flow of vehicle traffic and to improve safety, and intersection improvements to address bottlenecks and to improve operations. Next slide, please. Some other strategies under the optimizing of system capacity bucket include freight management, our ACEs, and then data collection and monitoring. For freight management, we focused on increasing the reliability of key truck routes and improving connectivity to major freight terminals, along with developing curb management standards to address congestion related to vehicles making deliveries. For the ACEs strategies, we know that connected and automated vehicles have the potential to improve traffic flow, so it's recommended that several of the recommendations from our CAV readiness study that we completed earlier this year be prioritized so that the region can begin to benefit from any of the safety or operational values that those vehicles may offer as we start to see more of them on our system. And as Alex mentioned, we do have that new funding pot to help support ACEs demonstration projects. And then finally, we're recommending that the region really harness the power that big data has to improve how we process data, to recognize patterns and needs, and also to emphasize traveler information systems to share more efficiently information about delays, incidents, weather, travel times, etc. With the idea there being that a more informed drivers will result in more efficiently utilized roadway capacity. Next slide, please. And then our final bucket is looking at strategies to promote mode shifts from single occupant vehicles. The idea here being that if we can make other modes more efficient, convenient, and or safe, we can reduce the number of cars on the roadway. So some of the strategies that are recommended within the CMP include developing some TDM specific strategic plans related to telecommuting or first and last mile travel options, building awareness about TDM strategies such as active transportation management, adapting our roadways to accommodate all users, including advancing complete streets concepts where appropriate. And as Alex mentioned, we have some funding and some projects planned there. We really need to look at improving our local street connectivity and accessibility. Some of those sidewalk projects and other local projects really get to this recommendation to improve our accessibility to our essential services. And then expanding the capacity and the connectivity for our public transportation options. These can include things like supporting our links and Centerrail efforts to optimize their route structure, hours, and frequency, so their service can provide better access to jobs and services, but also looking at how technology can play a role in things, and starting to support mobility as a service with single account system available across modes, and or looking at better sort of trip planning applications and making those more user friendly for people. Next slide, please. So that wraps up the recommendations that were made within the CMP. As I've mentioned before, the CMP is a living document, and we'll be sort of continually monitoring how we're progressing towards the targets that we've set, how we're progressing towards the goal that we as a region have set over this period. And so every 6 months, we'll be doing data collection for all of the performance measures that I presented before, and looking at how we're progressing towards our targets. And we'll be providing our findings to the board and committees, either through reports or presentation, whatever it makes the most sense. We'll do an annual report just to talk about how we've progressed and what strategies are really being the most effective. And then every 5 years, we'll sort of be doing what we've just done over again, reassessing and adjusting our goals, our objectives, looking at if we need to include new performance measures or maybe move on from some that aren't providing us any information, and then reassessing our targets. And next slide, please. That is all I have for you, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Hi, I have a question. Can you hear me? This is Ian.
Hi, Ian.
Hi. One of your strategies for optimizing system capacity was continuing with the signal retiming program, and I was just curious if MetroPlan has done any analysis in terms of signal retiming and crashes. Have those corridors over the past several years after the retiming, have crashes increased or decreased? And I was just wondering if any of that analysis went into the 2045 plan.
To my knowledge, and Alex, you can pipe up if I'm wrong, I don't think we did that analysis for the 2045 plan, but it's certainly something that we can do. So I can take that up. We have access to Signal 4 to start looking at some of the crashes on those roadways that we have retimed in the past. So I'll report back.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Hey, Laura, it's Will. Will this presentation be mailed out or emailed out? Sorry.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem.
Anyone else? Okay, looks like none. Thank you, Laura.
Okay, thank you, Lee. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, that includes today's presentations. We have 3 action items today. Our first action item is approval of the minutes from our August 28th meeting, which are in tab 1 in your agenda packets. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes? Don't forget to raise your hand, unmute yourself, and state your name when called.
This is Shad Smith. I don't know where the raised hand is, but I move to approve the minutes.
Second, Renzo.
Okay. Thank you. We have a motion and second. Is there any discussion? Doesn't look like it. There is a voice vote. All committee members, please unmute your microphones. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Are there any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. Our next item is the FDOT amendment to the fiscal year 2020-21 through 2024-25 TIP. It's found in tab 2 in your agendas. Mr. Keith Caskey from MetroPlan Orlando will present the information. Please hold your questions on this action item until the presentation is finished. Go ahead, Mr. Caskey.
Okay, well, this amendment includes 5 projects. 2 of these are in Seminole County. One of those replaces state funds with local funds for the design of a resurfacing project on State Road 436 in Altamont Springs. And then the other one replaces federal SU funds with local funds for the design of the Longwood South pedestrian corridor. And then there are 3 new railroad crossing safety projects that are being added in South Orange County. And it was mentioned earlier, that information is in your packets. So unless there's any questions, we're asking for your approval of the amendment.
This is Shad Smith. I move to approve these items.
Second, Renzo.
Okay. We have a motion and second. Is there any discussion? This is a voice vote. All committee members, please unmute your microphones. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. Our third item is the proposed 2021 board committee meeting schedule. This is found in tab 3 in your agendas. Mr. Keith Caskey will again present the information. Please hold your questions on this action item until the presentation is finished. Go ahead, Mr. Caskey.
Okay, well, this one's pretty straightforward. I mean, the draft schedule is in your packets. I think the only thing we need to discuss is the date for the May meeting. Right now, the schedule has it as May 28th, which is Memorial Day weekend. So we just wanted to see if you all want to keep that date as is, or if you want to move it up a week to the 21st, or how you all wanted to handle that.
Okay, if you weren't in the first meeting, the TSMO committee did move theirs up to the 21st. Is there any discussion? If not, do we have a motion to either amend or approve the schedule?
Motion to amend the schedule.
I'll second. This is Shad.
Okay, could you do that again? Who made the motion?
So this is Renzo making the motion to amend the schedule to conform to the TSMO schedule, basically having the meeting take place on May 21st.
Okay, thank you. And
I
Shad.
second. This is Shad Smith.
Okay, thank you, Shad. So this also is a voice vote. All committee members, please unmute your microphones. All in favor, say aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. So there are no TAC only presentations. There are several items under general information in tab 4 in your agenda packets. Our next TAC meeting will be on December 4th. Since we do not have any meetings scheduled in November. As we heard earlier, this will be a virtual workshop so that a quorum will not be required. If this changes, we will be notified by MetroPlan Orlando staff. The next MetroPlan Orlando board meeting will be November 18th and will be a hybrid meeting with some board members, staff, and members of the public attending in person, and other board members, staff, members of the public, and presenters attending virtually on Zoom. There is a 2045 MTP working group meeting, which will be a virtual meeting coming up on November 3rd. Are there any committee members who have final comments? If you do, please use the raise hand function and unmute yourself when you are recognized. Okay, see none. If any members of the public wish to comment, please use the raise hands function and you will be recognized, or dial *9 on your phone keypad. We'll unmute your mic. After you are recognized, please state your name and address for the record and limit your comments to 2 minutes or less. Are there any comments at this time?
I don't see any raised hands, Madam Chairwoman.
Okay. Are there any written or phone comments that were submitted before the meeting?
No, there were not.
Okay. So at this time, if there is no further business, we stand adjourned. And thank you.